There you go. Say it again.
Okay, I'd like to announce that the regular meeting of Lehigh County Authority Board of Directors has begun. And I just want to announce that we just came out of executive session where we discussed potential litigation
And legal advice from the solicitor.
and legal advice from the solicitor. And that executive session has been terminated, and now the regular meeting has begun. And this meeting is being recorded and it's live streaming. And if there's any public participation from anybody in the public, please sign in. And hopefully there is.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
could we do a roll call of the board to, so we know for the record, everyone who's here?
Okay, let's have a roll call of the board.
So start with Brian Nozzle. Not here. Scott Bieber.
Here.
Dick Bonner.
Here.
Norma Cusick.
Here.
Ted Lyons.
Here.
Kevin Baker.
Yeah.
Linda Rosenfeld. Jeff Morgan.
Here.
Amir Famili. We have 6 board members, so we do have a quorum.
Thank you. The review of the agenda, are there going to be any additions to the agenda?
So we have no additions for the agenda today. We do have some lengthy information to go over, but following the close of the regular meeting, we will convene an executive session again to discuss potential real estate acquisition and other matters with the solicitor.
Okay, thank you, Liesl.
Yep.
Approval of the minutes, we have 2 meetings to approve. The first meeting is from September 12th. And I would assume that everybody's read the minutes.
Relative to the minutes of September the 12th, I'm going to need some help. Okay. If we look at the minutes, we find that Linda Rosenfeld was present at the start of the meeting. She seconded the approval of the minutes. And when we get down to the item where there was a roll call, her vote is not included. Now, I don't know if she left the meeting or if that was overlooked at the time of the roll call.
Well, it could be that it was overlooked because at the later roll call meeting, she's showing up as a no. So the second roll call vote that we had.
We can review the tape and make a correction. I'm assuming that Linda was there for the whole meeting and did vote, and that vote would be a 8-0 vote, but not sure. We'll review the tape.
Well, could we have a motion to approve the minutes if there's no anything else to mention, Dave? Is there anything else with the minutes?
You want to hold them off till next time?
I was gonna recommend we just approve the minutes condition on Liesl figuring out this discrepancy.
Scott, I think it would be best is to, you're supposed to identify what the changes are. So I think I would be better practice to just hold them until we know what the final form is.
Okay, well, then we'll table approval of these September 12th minutes until this is resolved.
I was going to mention there were eight members present for the whole meeting. So where we have the vote of 7-0, that should be 8-0, and Linda Rosenfeld added.
Oh, so you're clear that Linda was here.
Yeah, because we had 8 members at the beginning of the meeting and 8 members throughout the meeting.
Well, if that's the case, then we'll accept these minutes, that change to the minutes. Now that we have that change to the minutes, is there anything else with the minutes?
Okay, I'll make a motion then that we accept the minutes, including the change that indicates Linda Rosenfeld voted for the project of implementation.
Thank you. Any second that motion?
I'll second it. This is
Okay.
Norma.
Okay, Norma, all in favor of approving the minutes from September 12th, say yes.
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 Opposed? No, the yes has it. On to the September 19th minutes.
Okay, I have a couple comments for September the 19th, none of which are evolutionary, but the first one is on page 3. If we look under the heading 578 water main crossing, at the end of the second line, it says diameter steel piper under the Interstate 78. I assume that piper does not refer to an individual, so therefore we'll drop the R and the word becomes pipe.
Okay, we'll take that correction.
And my second suggestion is on page 4, water main replacement. The second paragraph is seconded by Jeff Morgan, and I suggest we eliminate the. So it says, seconded by Jeff Morgan, approve the capital project authorization level.
Okay, we'll take that change.
Okay,
If there's not, yeah, thank you, Dick. If there's nothing else, can I hear a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
And we have a first and a second there. All in favor of approving these minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
I abstain.
And I will abstain too, because I was not at the meeting. Okay, with the approval of the minutes out of the way, we now open any public comment. Is there any public comment?
I have no comment, thanks.
I'm sorry.
It was Brian Chamberlain saying he has no comment.
On to the next action discussion items, finance and administration, 2023 budget preliminary review.
All right. Thank you. Oh, looks like Brian's trying to join the meeting, so we'll see if he's able to join us for this. We do have a presentation today to go through the budget, and we're giving you what we're considering to be our preliminary or a proposed budget.
Preliminary phase 3.
The third presentation of the budget, and we do have some changes from the last presentation we gave. So we'll kind of go through those and add in a few additional comments. So let me get this up and sharing. Brian, if you're joining us, if you want to say hello, make sure we can hear you.
All right. Hello, everybody. Sorry I'm late.
All right, welcome. So today is the 10th of October. This is our 2023 budget review. And actually, Ed will present, and I'll just jump in on a couple things related to rates. Is that good with you, Ed?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay.
So, as I said before, we're in phase 3 of this. On a preliminary basis, the first go around, we talked about some of the assumptions that were used as the basis for the budget for 2023. We talked about headcount, we talked about some of the internal services spending. And at this point in time, since the phase 1, we have not made a change to any of the internal services. None of the assumptions have really changed. So really headcount, payroll dollars, all of the associated numbers with that are as they were presented on the first go around and even on the second go around. So what we'll talk about today is any specific changes to suburban water, suburban wastewater, and then the city division. And then we have some things that will still be coming up with respect to suburban water and rates. And then hopefully we'll have had enough information and understanding of the budget to be able to have an approval on the 24th. If not, we have a deadline of the 1st, so somewhere in between if necessary. And then last part would be some type of rate adoption by the 14th of November. Losing track of my months already. The budget gets too long. So this is a different kind of summary than we're used to seeing with, because it details some of the operating side, some of the capital side, some of the metrics associated with both of them. Gives you an idea of total cash flow and total fund balance, which not only includes cash, it includes any money that we have invested that's sitting in reserve. So we'll just go down. We'll talk about the operating side first in suburban water. So net revenues available for debt service are $6.4 million. We're going to pay out debt service of about 3.5. So debt service coverage is going to be 1.83 on suburban wastewater against almost $23 million of revenue. We'll generate $8.8 million available for debt service. Debt service is a very low amount because we haven't borrowed for a while in suburban wastewater. That will change in the future as we look at 537, but for now, we're still in a very low debt fund. And so debt service is going to be around 12.08. City division with almost $55 million of revenue, we should have 32 million, almost $32 million available for a debt service of 15.1 million. So debt service will be 2.1. As we look at total LCA, our debt service ratio will be on a weighted basis of 2.43. So all of the numbers are good. We're above 1.20 for sure. And I think most of them are better than what we thought we were going to be at in 2022. So in terms of capital budget, you can see the capital expenditures there for suburban water of $6.8 million. We'll get about $2.8 million coming from operating reserves and current revenues. We did plan borrowing, and we will probably make a call for about $3.9 million of money from the $12.2 million of borrowing we did this year. And at the end, project reserves will be about $320,000. On the wastewater side, we got a little bit more than $7 million worth of expenditure. We will get all of that from the operating reserves in current rates. We will expect to have almost $6 million in total reserve balances at the end of the period. City division, $15.2 million of capital. We'll get about 13.9 or almost 14 from rates and reserves. And
Question.
Yes.
Of the 13 million you're getting from revenue and operating reserves, I'm just curious, how much of that comes from revenue and how much of it comes from reserves?
To be honest with you, I think except for suburban wastewater, almost all of the funding from revenue and reserves is revenue.
Thank you.
And I'm not sure that that's not the case in suburban wastewater. When we get to that fund, we'll kind of re-verify that.
Okay, thank you.
So we are going to finally close on that PennBest loan, hoping January 2023. So that'll be worth 1.2 million of borrowing that's kind of carried over. So we'll end up with about $3 million in project reserves, and altogether capital, we're going to spend almost $29 million of capital, and we're going to need to we'll be borrowing $5.2 million. Okay, just a very high level look at cash flows for suburban wastewater. We're given all the cash flows with the cash balance of $7 million to start the year, and a surplus of 2.9 minus the money that's going to go to capital above. We should have an ending operations cash balance of a little bit more than $7 million. That equates to 241 days of cash on hand. Again, the project reserve balance between about 320,000, and we do have some other reserves and investments that include some restricted balances, $4.9 million. But altogether, in terms of cash and near cash, you'll be talking $12.3 million, and that will be against the $12.3 million that we're coming into the year with on a rounded basis. So. Suburban wastewater, we're going to start off the year, we think 4.2, we'll get a surplus of 8.1. We're going to throw most of that out as capital, and that'll leave us with $5.2 million in cash. This one would be a little bit lower than the 180 days that we like, but as I've been saying for a period of time, there's still a pretty big amount of reserves. You can see $7.3 million in investments that push that fund up to $18.5 million. So I get less concerned about 136 days because you still have a lot of money sitting in invested balances that doesn't get included in that equation. City division, we start the year off with almost 16 million, almost $17 million surplus. We give $14 million of capital out. That should leave us with 18.3 million. That should be worth 208 days, and that'll give us a total fund balance of a little bit more than 82 million against 79.4 coming into the years. So just looking at total LCA, and I'm just looking at the fund total balance, we'll have $113 million in cash, near cash, altogether for the entire business, and that'll be up from the 109 million we're coming in with. Okay, this is our typical, and like I said, the only fund that really had any small change to numbers in the operating side was suburban wastewater, and we'll talk a little bit. It's not much. So you can see $2.2 million net income, 2.4 for wastewater and 4.8 for city division. So we're up to $9.4 million in total net income. You can see that that's up between forecast and budget for the year, kind of just a little bit lower than where we were in 2021. Cash flows, not much in suburban water, 47,000, wastewater, a little bit more than $1 million, city division, 2.7 million. So altogether, $3.7 million of cash flow. That's going to be down from where we were in 2022, and going to be down, actually, down to where we budgeted in 2022 and finished 2021. And but the good news is, when I look across the net income and it's all positive, and I look across cash flows all positive, we're doing something right. Debt service coverage ratio, 1.83, 12.08, 2.10. We talked about them. Again, all good with respect to the internal hurdle at 1.20. And I believe suburban water is down just a tiny bit. Obviously, wastewater is up from where we think we're finishing 2022, and city divisions pretty much right on. I think we covered all of the capital spending in the previous slide. So again, just a total of $29 million. That's a lot of capital money.
This capital spending value that we have for 2023 is really the major driver for the cash flows being
Absolutely
different from the prior year.
Yeah, you're spending almost, well, if you look at the numbers, almost $9 million more in 2023 compared to what we budgeted for this year, and about $50 million worth more than we're forecasting this year.
And I've asked this before, but we can spend that, we're good? Yeah, okay.
This is my approach to look at it, reserves, not only in terms of the 180 days cash flows to look, but also put some equation and some numbers on these cash on hand with respect to invested balances, and also to factor in how much we really have sitting around with respect to capital too. And so if you just look at the operating expenses of $10.7 million, once you include the investments, you're going to be up to 309, and that's up from the 241 days that we said we were going to have on cash only. So essentially, when you look at the reserves, your $10.4 million of cash sitting in reserves, the operating reserve requirement, usually 180 days is half the year. So the reserve amount that we would really need to fit the bill of goods would be $5.4 million, and we're over that by $5 million. So that having that a positive number is a good thing. As you go down the capital requirement, I say that you should at least be reserving some portion of your depreciation expense. And here I'm saying $2.6 million worth of depreciation with a 1.50 requirements requires 3.9 million. And if you say that you need to have a half a year of that, you're your requirement would be $1.9 million and you're over again by $3 million because you had $5 million. So when I look at operating reserves, invested reserves in some portion of capital reserves, we're showing a positive number at the end on suburban water. And as I look at wastewater, you're showing an excess against the operating reserve requirement of $6.9 million of 11.2. So that's good. And your capital requirement against $4.6 million of depreciation, you're up by 7.7. So again, suburban water up by 3 million, suburban wastewater up by almost $8 million with respect to what I would call a minimum reserve requirement. On the city side, operationally, we have an excess of $8.7 million because we had $21.3 million against reserve requirement of 12.7. On the project side, given the capital depreciation expense, depreciation expense of not $5.9 million, we're up by $4.2 million to the reserve required of 4.4. So in total, your reserves are basically a little bit more than I would expect to have for a half a year across a number of different avenues.
Question. I've asked this before, but I forget the answer. The depreciation expense figures come from general accepted accounting principles.
Yes, basically take the gross cost of an asset divided by the years of useful life. And that's your annual depreciation model.
There's a whole variety of assets, I suspect, on the spreadsheet that we derive these numbers from.
Yes, and I wish I could tell you exactly what the gross value of all them assets are, but I could if we looked at the balance sheet. But yes, you are correct. It's a cumulative factor that changes every year as we add new assets and as some assets now use up their
Straight line pretty much out.
We stay with straight line.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. All right, so this is suburban water in the same format as we looked at before with respect to operations, capital budget, and total cash flow. And I'm just kind of going down. We're at 1.3 in debt service coverage ratio. We had done the last session at 1.82. We went up 0.01, and that was basically because when we looked at it, we had some, I'll call it major maintenance expense that was really capital that I kind of took out of the picture for the operation side. On the capital budget went down a little bit as I had mentioned when we were doing it. I hadn't fully allocated all of the $2.some million worth of administrative costs related to SCADA and the Munis re-implementation out of suburban because they essentially pay for it first. So we're doing it now, and it dropped it from $6.9 million to $6.8 million. Didn't really change the reserves. It just changes how much funding required from the borrowing, and it's actually up a little bit by a couple thousand or a couple $100. So. Total cash flow, just looking at the total cash flow, ending operations cash balance up 321,000, or down, I'm sorry, down 321,000. We went from 3.3 to 2.9. Primarily driving that is I had in our cash flow originally, before we did the administration allocation, I said we were going to be using $500,000 worth of invested money, and I'm not doing that. So we're leaving the invested money alone. We dropped the cash flow, and it really didn't do any harm to the fund in terms of key metrics anyway. So suburban water changed some, mostly in capital, a little bit on the operating side.
Excuse me, I have another question. Going back to the depreciation, how much of our assets are beyond the useful life in terms of depreciation?
That I would have to get back to you.
Is it a significant number? Is it a mean thing? Does it-
Beyond useful life, I would say not a real significant number, only because a lot of them are depreciated 25 years.
Yeah.
Some of them even in the neighborhood of 35 to 40 years, but I can certainly look at
I
that.
just, it's
No,
not,
you know what? Yeah, that's a good question, and I'll get the answer for
thanks.
you. It's just not laid out easy for me to pull off.
No, I understand that. It's good. Super question.
But I'll be happy to get back. That's a good question. So this is what the cash flows look like. I think we've covered most of it in the previous slide. It's $47,000. I like the metrics, 1.23, 1.83 capital coverage. Even what happened with borrow, we're getting almost 50% coming from rates. And then unrestricted total days cash on hand at 252, and we're still going to carry almost $3 million worth of reserves going into 2023. You can talk about this one.
Great. Yeah, so normally, this is also the presentation when we would go through rate impacts for all of the systems. And our last rate study for the suburban water system was actually done in 2017. So it's 5 years ago. We've been making adjustments annually based on the revenue requirements that come out of the budget process, and have done some pretty significant changes to rates over that 5-year period. So we thought it would be appropriate for us to take just a step back and update that rate study, look at our costs and how they're allocated to the different rate classes, and present that to you. We're hoping that it'll be done for the next meeting. Is that fair to say, Ed?
Yeah, I think we had some differences in some numbers, and I think once if I get to spend time on it this week, yes, we'll be able to do that.
So we know what the revenue requirement is, and that's what's in the budget. That won't necessarily change, but how the revenues is derived through the rate structure to our customers, that's what the rate study will do. So we have the fixed charge and the flow charge, all of that will be looked at. And hopefully we'll be ready to present. We have all the data together. It's just having our rate consultant do the analysis and present us with some options or review that with us.
Yeah, and we have some nuances to look at.
Yeah.
So yes, I think we can be ready for the next.
So our plan, what we normally would do in the process is present the rates to you in October for some discussion and publish them on our website. So customers and public have a chance to look at it. We will ask for the board to adopt them in November, but we'll leave that public comment period open until January. So if more comments come in, we can present that to you and make any final adjustments if needed in January. Rarely happens, but that's the process that we follow. And we like to do it early, rather than waiting until January for approval, so that we can let our large industrial customers know and have it published in our newsletter and that sort of thing. So we don't have specifics to present for you today, but wanted to hopefully in 2 weeks we'll have something for us to look at.
Thank you, Liesl.
Yep.
Are there any comments from the board on this draft budget?
Oh, that's just
Oh,
one
we got-
third.
We only went through one. We got 2 more to go.
Wishful thinking.
So I'll try to go a little faster.
Fine, that's fine.
So we're gonna look at suburban wastewater. And this one's really just the same as the summary, and this one's just a comparison. There was only some change in about $25,200. Again, that really was capital instead of major maintenance. So we took that out of the picture. It made the cash flow a little bit better by $25,200. Nothing really changed, other than previously we have reported a capital of $6.4 million. We're now at $7 million, and that's bringing over some of the administration cost into suburban wastewater. So kind of an allocation. The end of year project balance staying the same. So as you look at the cash flow and cash balance, at the end of 2023, we think we'll be at $5.2 million. And we had originally reported to you 5.9. And again, that's $641,000 worth of capital expenditure change. And that's really the only change on here.
Question, how are administration costs spread over the different?
It depends on the administration costs with respect to capital. I'll use two buckets to help you. The one was the SCADA, which was predominantly suburban. The other one was Munis reimplementation, which was kind of an even spread based on what we thought we were going to spend this year, because that has some money coming into this year and then going into the following year as well. So more an even spread on that one. So two blocks to consider.
Thanks.
So numbers look good on suburban wastewater, not much change, just capital. In terms of net cash flows, you got $1.1 million of cash flow versus a forecast of $3.8 million this year. Again, predominantly driven by, look at the difference of capital, $2.8 million versus $7 million in 2023. The operating ratio looks good, 1.12. Debt service coverage ratio looks good. Capital coverage ratio, well, that's above 100%, so no reason to borrow here. Unrestricted cash on hand is $292, and still going to have $7 million worth of reserves in suburban wastewater.
So again, getting into rates, just a couple of points to make here on this one. Number one, we have a small number of direct customers in our suburban wastewater division, about 2,500 direct accounts. And they're on a common rate for the most part, all being charged the same rate. And we haven't changed those in a few years, and we're not expecting to change those this year. At some point, we may want to look at those rates, but because it's such a small group, it's really not something we're focused on at this point. The bigger piece is the Western Lehigh municipal signatory rates, and we'll get into that in a little bit on the next item on our agenda with the user charge report. But we do have a detailed user charge report that's prepared every year to be incorporated into the budget, and we actually will ask for preliminary when we get to that item after this presentation.
Okay, so on the city, basically, we didn't change any of the operating results on the city side. So you still have same debt service, revenue available is the same, 2.10 is the same. You picked up 1.6 or $1.7 million worth of capital again through all of the allocations. So instead of 13,509, we're at 15,191. Same borrowing, and we'll end up with the same reserve. In terms of operating cash balance at the end of the year, that's going to change by the amount of capital that we just added to the picture. And at the end of the day, we'll have $82.1 million of total fund that's cash, near cash, versus 79.4. So that would substantiate the cash flow of $2.7 million. Again, positive number in terms of cash flows, and operating ratio is good, 1.72. Debt service coverage ratio of 2.1 is good, over 1 on capital coverage, and 356.7 days of unrestricted cash in total on hand.
So for the rates for the city division, we actually have these already calculated in proposed or draft form. So I wanted to share those with you, give you the preview on those rates. So just as a reminder, we talked about this before, the rates are developed by formulas that are included in the lease agreement. So what I'll show you is what that looks like. really the same thing. We don't focus a lot of attention on that here in the budget process, but the municipal signatory water and sewer rates are also by formula that's established through the longstanding municipal agreements that exist. And those rates were shared with the municipalities at the end of September. So they have that for their budget process as well as part of our normal communication with those municipalities. So getting into the 2023 rates for the city of Allentown division, I should note again, these are proposed rates based on the formulas, but we did submit them to the city for them to take a look at it. So they're kind of going through all the spreadsheets and making sure all the math is good, and we'll make any adjustments that they might see the need for before we ask you to approve them in November. But as you can see, we have a water fixed charge and a sewer fixed charge that's based on the meter size. Nothing's changing about the structure. It's just these are the new adopted rates, or the new rates for 2023 proposed. I'll do a side by side of what the impact is to the customer 2022 to 2023 at the end. So every customer in Allentown, for the most part, has both water and wastewater service. So they will have a fixed charge and a flow charge for both water and sewer. For the water charge and the sewer charge, it's a rate per 1,000 gallons. It's shown here. This is the 2023 proposed rate. And I should have mentioned this earlier. The terms of the lease agreement include a formula of CPIU, or inflation, plus 2.5%. So because inflation is very high this year, that's 7.6%. So the total rate impact to these scheduled rates is 10.1%. There's a couple of little adders in these flow charges related to if there's been a change of law that impacts our cost, or Delaware River Basin Commission charges, those get kind of added to these costs as well. That's part of the formula in the lease agreement. And then the second part, I thought this was a good time. We haven't talked about this in quite a while. We have additional rates that are added for capital cost recovery, as well as the administrative order charges that we collect on the city's behalf and return back to the city for administrative order costs. So since the beginning of the lease, we've completed the list of projects that's listed here. Almost $34 million worth of major capital improvements have been completed, and the recovery is included in that capital cost recovery charge that's shown on every customer bill. So the one note is the last project, the boiler project, which was just approved. We have the estimated project cost included in the rate per the agreement with the city, and we'll true that up or adjust it once we have final costs, once the project is completed.
Question,
Yeah.
is that included in the 10%?
No, it's separate from the 10%.
This would be on top of the 10%.
It's actually, yeah, it actually has the net effect of reducing the impact because we're only adding this one project. So the capital cost recovery charge is not going up by 10%. It's going up by a much smaller amount.
Got it.
Okay. So this is what the capital cost recovery charge actually looks like. It's a pretty small charge in the greater scheme of things, but that $34 million worth of work that we've completed results in these rate adders to the bill. So you can see there the cost recovery period over most of the projects is 30 years. So we capture it through the rate over a period of a couple of decades. The administrative order cost again is that should say 2023 fee is based on the city's debt service on the bonds that they issued to do the work on the administrative order. That's an excluded liability in the lease. So the city pays for it, they borrow for it, and then we collect it from the customer and give it to the city so they can pay their debt service. That's what that's looks like. The rates are a little complicated. There's a lot of components to it. We haven't looked at it in a while. That's why I thought it would be good to show it. But really, this is what we really want to look at, which is the side-by-side, what the bill looks like from one year to the next. This is a typical customer who uses 15,000 gallons per quarter, what their quarterly bill would look like this year versus in 2023. You see the total customer impact when you add up all the different charges is $19.55 per quarter. And on a percentage basis, that's actually 9.8%. So it's a little less than the 10, not by much, but it's a little less, 10.1%. I went through that really quick, but happy to answer any questions on the city rate structure if you have them.
Why does the CCR go down again?
So the CCRC went down just by a couple of pennies on the water side, and but it's going up on the wastewater side. So the reason it goes down is because it's calculated annually. The debt, we didn't add any new projects this year, so the debt service is the same, but the water volume comes up and down every year, and so the rate fluctuates a little bit based on that. Yeah. So the sewer capital cost recovery charge is going up by a little bit because we added the boiler project.
So.
Yes.
And I realize that we went through this before, and I've made this comment, and I'll make it again. I know a chunk of everyone's bill in Allentown is to pay off this.
Yeah,
We talked about that before.
sure.
So when we compare this to other water bills from other locations, they're not dragging an anchor behind them.
Right.
The way the residents of Allentown are.
Right, we have a $15 million debt payment.
Yeah.
That is due this year or in 2023. So that does weigh.
Great. And but having said that, and again, the rates are not yet established for the suburban water and so forth. Do you have a sense that how this would compare with that? I mean, if it's going to cost $219 a quarter for a resident of Allentown, is there any sense that you have now what that might look like?
Yeah, so I don't have the whole Lehigh Valley data analysis together yet that I normally present to you, but typically what we've been seeing is that the city water rate is higher, but the sewer rate is lower, and that's just the way that it is. So altogether, the city rates are a bit higher than our suburban divisions in most places, but they're still on the lower half of all of Lehigh Valley compared together. One of the things that is, we do have these pockets of suburban customers, for example, in Washington Township, where we have very small customer base, but pretty significant costs. Those rates are actually quite a bit higher than these. So we'll have that for you when we do the rate approval request. So, and again, these are submitted to the city for them to review to make sure we followed all the right protocols and formulas for that. So we'll have any final changes to you in November.
Okay. This is some of you had asked the question about where the admin went, and essentially this is how it allocated out again across 2 blocks, where $2 million ended up being divided 691 each in suburban water and wastewater, and then 632,000 in the city. So for a total of $2,014,000. I think we covered the rest of the capital numbers. We put these back up there because somewhere along the line, when I was doing these tables for the last presentation, I ended up getting eye fatigue and taking some of the annual projects and moving them down and around somewhere else, and it caused some angst. So on the administration side, big numbers there obviously are the Munis re-implementation of 984,000 and SCADA programming of 750,000. So that makes up the biggest factor of the $2 million. Suburban water, I don't think I had an annual projects problem with this one, and I think it was suburban wastewater, but just looking at the budget, you got $2.4 million of annual projects. Next bigger project would be main replacements. And then looking at, on teetering down water main of 350,000, that would be your biggest projects on the suburban water side. And in terms of wastewater, the annual projects are 325,000, not the $90,000 that I showed the last time, so that changed. The pre-treatment plant improvements are 800,000. We should be picking up about $2.7 million worth of projects on a Western Lehigh interceptor system, and then the satellite systems will end up costing us about 993,000, and then the park pump station rehabilitation will be $1.5 million. So you got a total $6.3 million without the admin there. In city, annual projects of almost $1.3 million. Your non-CCRC projects are 760,000. Your large projects and CCRC projects are 4.2, most of that coming from $3.2 million of annual water main replacements for a total of $6.3 million. In city wastewater, annual almost, well, 1.7 million. On CCRC, 300,000. Large projects and CCRC, $3.2 million. The biggest item in there is going to be the $2.8 million worth of boiler replacement. And then as you get down the bottom, $3 million plus on 537 projects. Combination of flow management strategy, alternatives analysis, and 537 planning. These were the trend graphs I put in. I'll try to cover them quickly. You can see we're on suburban water side. We've gone from $9.9 million 5 years ago to $16.3 million. Again, most of that in rate changes to accommodate capital. Operating income has gone from 1.4 to 2.6, kind of similar in 2021. Same thing, net income, we're 2.1 this year. I think we're going to be $2.2 million next year. We're budgeting to be there next year. Net available for capital. We had a big amount in 2019 with the changes in operating expenses. We've kind of leveled off to 2.9 and 2.9 again for the last 2 years. Debt service coverage, we peaked out at 3.93 in 2021. We've kind of hovered around 1.8, 2022 and 2023. Capital spending, we started with almost 9, kind of dropped it a little bit from 5 to 4 and 3, and then back up to $7 million in 2023. Wastewater side increases 14 million. We started in 2019, so I'm using a 5-year period. Now we're up to $22 million. Again, lots of capital will be spent and will be spent in the future. Operating income, we were negative. I didn't realize that we were on the negative side mostly for the last 4 years, and this will be the first year that we've kind of turned on the positive side, which is good. Net income loss, similar, a couple negative years. We almost hit $1 million this year. We're going to be at $2.4 million, 2023. Money available for capital, that needs to go up. We started with 9 million. We're kind of heading right back up. We dropped a little bit in 2020, 21, 22, now back up to $8 million of money coming from rates. Debt service coverage ratio, that's always been good because you have low debt. So we're at 12.1 almost. And you can see the capital spending 5 years ago, we were almost $11 million. And with some of the planning efforts in 2020 and 21, not as much. And now we start to see where the rubber starts to meet the road. So city division, numbers crunching a little bit here, 37 million. And we've climbed to almost 51 million. In terms of operating income, we started with 13, we're at 23, or kind of peaked in 2021 and 25. Again, even on the net income side, for a couple of years, we were on the negative side, and We're gonna budget almost $5 million in 2023. Net available for capital, you can see where we were in 2019 and 20, 1.3, 6.2, now we're at 16.7. And it's kind of hovered around 16 over the last 3 years. Debt service coverage, good, 2.10, we climbed above the 2 level. And capital spending, well, looking at that graph, you can see by far, we're gonna spend the most money that we spent in the last 5 years, $15.2 million, so. So what's remaining is Jennifer will be going over her wastewater user charge report, coming up shortly. We did talk about the water rate study that I've already committed to, so. And I don't think there'll be any final budget changes, but one never knows. And so we'll say, if anything does creep up, we'll report that before we decide to vote on it, so. You got one meeting left to do it, and I guess rate adoption in November.
So this is the longest of the budget presentations with all the details kind of in final or near final form. You have the book that was presented to all of you with the even finer details. So certainly encourage you to read it, look at it, ask any questions between now and 2 weeks from now. You can certainly get your questions to me, and between Ed and I, we can try to answer them at the meeting.
I do have 2 questions, just to confirm, gross value of assets and assets with net book values.
Well, I'm sorry, what is that again?
Gross value of assets, so the value before you depreciate it. And then he asked the question about, do we have any assets that have a net book value of 0, meaning that they used up their useful life?
I'm just curious what that looks like.
Yeah.
I don't know what it means,
Yeah.
but just on the books anyway, if you have an asset that you theoretically beyond its useful life,
Generally speaking, what it means, probably time to replace it.
it probably comes in prices. So it just be interesting to see what that number looks like
Yeah,
and see if it is it significant, does it, if, you get it.
Yeah. right.
yeah, I mean, unless you had a fortunate that you had an asset that was, ran forever.
Yeah, like my horse, my wire.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it has a useful life of 20 years and it's still running
Still
in
running.
25. That could happen.
Are there any board comments or questions on this presentation?
It's Brian.
I'm sorry, Brian?
As Brian, was there a budget package passed out, a new revised budget packet passed out at today's meeting? Hard copy?
No, the hard copy packet that was mailed to everybody is the most current version.
Okay, thank you.
And it's also on our website.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I'm not really keen on finances, but it looks like overall we're pretty secure financially. Seems like it.
I hate to use the word secure as meaning that forever.
No, I mean,
so-
currently right now, I mean,
Yeah, given the metrics right now, I would say I'm comfortable with the metrics.
I'm looking at the charts, in 2023 is looking. It looks
If
pretty
you
good.
remember way back when, we set out to do one thing. Was adjust the rates, capture the revenue that we needed to do to avoid having to borrow. And given the economic climate, that was the right thing to do. And so we did that. And the second thing was trying to make the capital spending program more realistic, and we're doing that.
Thank you. If nothing more, we'll move on to the next item on the budget, which is our presentation on the Western Lehigh Intercept user charge report, and at the end of that, we'll be looking for preliminary approval.
Yeah, so
Wonderful.
Jennifer Montero joins us every year to review this, and turn it to you to make some comments about it.
Okay, so included, good afternoon. I come here every year. It's like an annual, like Christmas, right? 33-page report in the board packet. And it outlines all the details on how these rates are calculated for the Western Lehigh Interceptor and the Little Lehigh Relief Interceptor Phase 1 and 2. So these are the rates that LCA charges our municipal signatories. And fun fact about this report, it has been published in this format since 1985. And it's a requirement of the agreements that we have with our municipal signatories. And that all stems back to our 1981 agreement we have with the city that says we will charge rates to our signatories that are significant or substantially identical to the ones that the city calculates for its municipal signatories. So that's the history of this thing. It's a very detailed report. Like I said, I'm not here to go through all the details. I'm just here to tell you what has changed in the past year. So for 2023, the changes are have to do with collecting revenue to reflect actual capital spending. And as you likely have heard from Phil, we're executing projects that are included in the interim Act 537 plan this upcoming year. So we started discussing the impacts of these costs with our signatories very early in the budget process. Back in July, I believe we started talking to them. And they indicated a readiness to incorporate those costs in the rates that we charge them and pass those on to their collection system users. So we are going to be increasing the rates about 16%, and that would be reflective of the cost to the average residential user. And that is due to the projected capital spendings, and that's on a breakdown of the capital is on page 15 of the report, if you'd like to see that. So we usually, in past years, we've included a reserve amount to save money for future capital spending, and now we're trying to preserve that reserve amount for actual projects that are going to be included in 567. And increase the rates now to reflect the capital spending that's on deck for 2023. So that's all I have. And if you have any questions?
Do you mind if I just add two comments? I had mentioned before about our direct customers, the fact that we really don't have many direct customers. So when Jennifer calculates the impact to the average residential customer of 16%, that is not necessarily what customers will pay, because it's really up to each township and borough to then translate what we charge them into what they charge their customers. So it's a little funky that way, but we calculate it that way to try to put it in a way that makes sense to talk about the rates. The second thing, I mentioned it earlier, but Jennifer presented this user card report to the signatories at the end of September, and offered the opportunity for comments and questions, and I believe received zero. So the board always likes to know that we're doing the public comment and, offering that opportunity. So Jen always does a really great job with our signatories. It's a lot of detail that she tries to walk them through.
I had one comment. I don't quite understand it, but I sort of understand it, I believe, but whether our signatories want to move our cost of our capital projects into the operation and maintenance budget, so that they can use that money for the interim 537 plan execution.
Correct.
Is there any negative aspect to that? Moving money from that budget, from the capital budget in the operation and maintenance budget?
So do you mind if I answer that? I'm sorry, you can answer. You're really not moving money. It's really more about where it's captured in the rate. So I think the concern that we will watch for over time is if we're paying for capital each year, whatever the capital actually is, it could have a sawtooth effect on the rates as your costs are up one year or lower the next year, your rate is going to go up and down. So we have an understanding with the signatories that we will talk to them every year about what our capital looks like for the future year and have this discussion about how the rates are looking. Because as Jen mentioned, we had captured reserve amounts over the course of many years to build reserves. And so we could sort of smooth out the rate impact by using some reserves in some years or doing some different things like that. So I think that's the main concern that we have is that we have rates that go up and down by significant amounts. No one likes that. So to try to keep the rates a little bit smoother, we might.
And that's what this was intended to do, more or less.
Yeah, well, yeah, including the capital expense in with the current rates means that they're covered and we don't have to use any reserves.
Okay.
But in the future, if our capital is not as high or it's even higher, we might use the reserves to sort of smooth out the rates.
Question, you said you've been using the same format since 1980, not you. It's the infant then, but 1985. Is that should it be looked at again? Is it fine? Is it good? Is it,
The rates are the rates.
I need the format.
The format,
Yeah.
it's probably time for a change, but we might be changing these agreements as well, so.
Okay.
You know, to put a lot of time and effort into changing the format, it does its job, and again, it's all traced back to the agreements. We agreed that we were gonna present it in substantially the same format as the 1985 user charge reports. So we have just been doing the same thing every year. We've been supplementing and updating. So, you know, there's been a lot of changes since the 80s. You know, every time we add something to the Western Lehigh Interceptor, like the Spring Creek Pump Station, we note those changes. The lease, we note those. We just anything that's different is noted, and that will be reflected in the executive summary. But the methodology is the same every year, and that all goes back to the contract. So I'm a contract administrator, so I get to do the rates.
So just from a big picture then, like the city, the way they build their signatories, they do if I understand it, like a strength, waste strength and a flow. So that what you're saying is LCA's signatories are based on the strength and flow. That's where that comes from way back when. Okay, all right. And then is there anybody who's actually a signatory of both the city and LCA or a couple people? I'm just curious.
Yeah, and Lower Macungie is a signatory of LCA primarily, but they have a small section of their system that flows
Okay,
outside of the LCA system. So,
and so that'd be a signatory.
so they get two sets of bills, two
Yeah,
sets
they
of rates.
Okay,
And then you have South Whitehall Township and Salisbury Township that are signatories with us because of the Little Lehigh Relief Interceptor.
Okay.
Phase 1. So they use Park Pump Station.
okay,
So.
they're both. Okay, thanks.
Anything further on this? Okay, we're up for preliminary approval of this. If there's no further discussion on that, is anybody want to make a motion to give preliminary approval to this, President report?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor, do we want a roll call on this?
That's your call, Mr.
No, we
Chairman.
don't need, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes carried. Thank you very much. Okay, on to the next approval of some capital projects coming up. $100 wastewater treatment plant disinfection and dechlorination system improvements.
All right, Chuck.
Yes, thank you, Liesl. Well, everybody, this project is the final phase of the effluent disinfection system improvements at Pines Island. The reason I say final phase is this project originally in June of 2020, the board approved a sodium hypochlorite disinfection project. And the purpose of that project was to discontinue the use of gaseous chlorine and for safety reasons, and also it was a project that was indicated with a high priority in the master plan. So that project was started and partially finished. The part that was finished was construction of a building adjacent to the sludge thickener tank pump station and the use of the hypochlorite there to control odors. And that was completed in last summer. And then another portion of the project that was completed was construction of a temporary hypochlorite disinfection system for the chlorine contact tank plant effluent. And a temporary system was needed prior to demolition of the gas chlorine system because storage, hypochlorite storage tanks, the permanent location of those was to be in the chlorine building in the room where the 18 half-ton cylinder tanks are presently located. So that project, that phase of the project was not followed through for reasons of some unforeseen operational problems that we ran into with the temporary disinfection of the plant effluent using the sodium hypochlorite. Those problems started last summer and fall, and around that time we started to look at ways to improve mixing, improve tank performance, to optimize the system to proportion the doses of the hypochlorite solution between the two channels of the tank. Plant operations and our engineer did extensive trial and error testing out there to try to improve the situation. And what was difficult was to achieve a balance between the adequate fecal coliform kills and the maximum residual chlorine in the plant effluent. And in the summer months, in the warmer months, our permit or discharge permit for Klein's Island has stricter limits for fecal coliform. And that being the case, it was difficult to strike that balance. Brian Geisel is here. He's the project engineer. He can add a little bit more detail on some of the unforeseen problems that we ran into out there.
Yeah, so the operational problems mainly showed up in the higher fecals that showed up in the effluent post disinfection. So as Chuck said, there was a lot of troubleshooting with stuff that was inherent of the contact tank even before hypo was installed, stuff like improper mixing and dispersion of the chemical, imbalance in residual, short circuiting. So there was a lot of attempts to fix that stuff with operational stuff and engineering, computational fluid dynamics. But ultimately it was decided that in order to get numbers in the fecals that we were comfortable with, like now and looking into the future, that this dechlorination would be the ultimate solution. So we can dose more hypo on the front end, run a higher residual throughout, and take it out at the end.
Right. So what we did is we contacted DEP about a year ago. It was last October. We contacted them to talk about possibly doing a pilot study at Klein's Island for injecting the chemical sodium bisulfite, which it works. It's an instantaneous reaction, and it gets rid of your excess chlorine, gases off. So DEP reacted very positively to that. They also went on to say that sodium hypochlorite disinfection is often accompanied by dechlorination at plants that have strict discharge criteria like ours, like the city. And so we submitted a program, hypo or sodium bisulfite pilot test program to them late in 2021 and received their approval. And then we started to, or early spring this year, we started to dose with bisulfite solution via a temporary system that plant staff and a contractor had set up using tanks and chemical feed pumps. And the results from that testing were very successful. They're very positive, allowing operations to achieve the adequate fecal kills especially during the summer months, because we ran it all summer, while balancing the total residual chlorine in the plant effluent. So after those successful results, we started design with the engineer that designed the hypo project. So we had design plans put together, and then we did the project last month. So we see this as not only a fix for the operational problems that we experienced, but also looking down the road. I don't know if Phil ever pointed this out, but after the Act 537 approval, DEP is going to impose stricter criteria on Klein's Island plant for total chlorine, for residual chlorine, I believe.
That was just a proposed, or nothing's been finalized.
Right, it's in the draft NPDES permit. And to achieve those numbers, we're going to need dechlorination. So I think the system would have been needed sooner or later. It was just a bit of a painful process to realize that we needed it at this time.
So I just make a comment. I'm surprised you lasted this long. I know I have other clients who their permits are in different cycles, and what they had maximum daily values for chlorine, residual and fecal. Then those went to instantaneous maximums. And once that happened, you couldn't sample all day. If you had a bad one, take a couple more samples. If you had one bad one, you were done. So they've put in, I've seen in the last 10 years, we've had multiple chlorine, people went from gas to liquid and then had to add the dechlor, did it all at the same time. So I'm surprised you haven't had to address this already.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jeff. And the plant staff did vet during the design phase of the initial project, the hypo project, they did tour another facility that had on-site hypochlorite generation. And that was deemed not cost effective in the long run. So we went to tanks, to storage tanks for hypo that would be trucked in. So the scope of the project is on page 3 of the memo. It's rather long, but basically it's tanks, it's chemical feed tanks, sodium bisulfite feed tanks installed in the existing chlorine building, chemical feed pumps, distribution, conduit, hoses to convey the chemical at 3 injection points in the chlorine contact tank, one for each channel. There's 2, there's an inner and outer channel, and then one for when they use the effluent pump station during high flow conditions. So we can dose with the dechlorination during a high flow event that we use the effluent pump station. There's controls, there's SCADA connectivity included in this. And then the last item is just completion of the unfinished elements of the prior project, which is demolition of the gas chlorine system, and then installation of the permanent hypochlorite tanks in the room where the chlorine cylinders are presently stored. So we advertised the project for bid. In late August, we opened the bids. In late September, this is for 2 contracts. We received 3 bids for the general contract, the lowest being submitted by LB Industries at $495,000. The low bidder for the electrical contract, the lowest of 2 is Diefenderfer at $234,000 and change. LB Industries, the GC. If you recall, they were low on the GC contract for the boiler project, which the board approved last month. They've done a lot of work at the city of Bethlehem wastewater plant. They've got very positive references for the work that they completed there. And Diefenderfer, we've worked with quite a bit. They're local. They've done a bunch of jobs, bunch of small and larger projects for us. So we feel pretty good about the low bidders, and we're asking for award of these bids along with the capital project authorization of $843,409.65.
You mentions here that the total bids received is significantly above the
Yes.
The engineer's estimate.
Yes, yeah, they were, Ted, and I talked to the engineer about that, and we have very detailed construction phasing on this project to maintain disinfection while this project is being constructed. And we believe that attributed to some of the high cost. Also, just inflationary impacts to materials and equipment it's just incredible right now. So I'm disappointed that the price is so much more. But I don't think it will come down if we wait 6 months. I don't know. I hope it will.
They have the midterm elections. When you get bids, like, I've asked you this before, but let's ask it again. And you scope the bid, you bring the low contractor in, go through everything. Do you bring the second contractor in as well, or typically just the low contractor? You got a bid for Diefendorfer at 214,000.
Yeah.
The next bid's at 319,000. Like, these guys are looking at Venus and Mars, right?
Okay, yeah, I mean, when I get a bid and it's really low, I will call the contractor before we award it and say, did you understand this bid? Because bidders there's a provision that they can retract their bid if they make an error. And I will question them. For this one, Eastern, I just think they were throwing a number at it. I think they probably had plenty of work and they said, well, we'll just throw this one out. You never know. Yeah, but I mean, I think the scope of the project was very clear. We had a mandatory pre-bid. All these bidders were there in attendance, and I think they understood the scope. I just think some are maybe a little bit more greedy than others.
Any other questions on this proposal? Can we put these, put both bids together in one motion, including the professional authorization, put it all in one motion?
Yeah, so what we typically do would be a motion for the capital authorization construction phase for the 843-403-65. The professional services authorization for Dewey for the 58,500. General contract award to LD Industries for the 495-509-85. And the electrical contract award to Diefendorfer for the 214-393-80. And that would all be one motion if someone would like to make it.
So moved.
We have a motion by Ted.
Second.
Okay. So we have a second. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye to the motion.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it, motion carries. Thank you. Move ahead with this project. On to the next capital project. Lions Island Sewer System Preliminary Screening of Alternatives, planning phase.
All right, this is for Phil. You need to put your presentation up?
Yes, please. All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm gonna try to make this as simple as possible because we can go off the rails pretty quickly here. What we're gonna talk about right now is referred to as the PSOA, which is the preliminary screening of alternatives. And this may sound familiar to some of you because LCA did this exact same thing like 8 years ago for the prior planning phases. What's different about this one, this includes the entire system. So it's not just the LCA piece, it's the entire KISS system is being looked at for the PSOA. So that's a big distinction between now and 8 years ago. We're gonna talk about a brief review of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going to be. So where we've been, I'm not gonna go back before 2021. If you want to know before 2021, let me know. The flow characterization study, which included, just say roughly 100 meters in the system. That was from March through October of 21. At the same time, the data was being looked at 4 different times, and that the last time was the conclusion in December of 21. Concurrently, the model was being prepared and calibrated, started in 21, and it finished June of this year. And then I came before the board again, June of this year to get authorization for the capacity problem definition. And that started in July and that concluded maybe a week ago. So this is why I'm before you for the next phase, which again is the PSOA phase. So, the proposal is 19 pages long. There's a lot of detailed information in the appendices. For the purposes of today, we're not getting into those weeds, but the modelers are going to use all those appendices as like their guide to model. But when you think about it, there aren't that many options out there. You can either do some of the treatment, do some of the conveyance, or you can store it. So of course, it sounds easy, but there's a lot into that. So the objective is just to try to figure out the right combination of what I just talked about on how to achieve three main goals, which I didn't put on the screen, but I'll tell you. We need to eliminate SSOs under 2050 conditions, which includes 7.5 million gallons of new flow. And under the 5-year storm event, which is Hurricane Ida, like we talked about a couple months ago. So we want to eliminate SSOs. DEP does not like Alpha 03 at Klein's Island. They do not want to see that activated in the future. So we have to start at the plant and work backwards. And then the last goal is every municipality is going to tell us where they want a dry day flow and where they want the wet day flow. It's called the hydraulic grade line. Where do they want the sewage inside the pipe during wet and during dry? So we have to, accommodate their requests. So again, it's those three goals we're trying to solve with this PSOA. And that's gonna be done under 6 main tasks. Deliverables, or it's a combination of figures, tables, memos, spreadsheets, and a lot of meetings. Schedule, if authorized, would be this month. It'll go April, maybe earlier. And then we'll get into the PSOA request later. All right, so we'll get right into it. Task 1. We're calling this the common component phase of the proposal. So this is no matter what we do, what selection, what alternatives we select, there's a handful of common things that are going to be done no matter what. And one of them, related to LCA, is we're going to extend our pump station force main to the plant. It's been talked about since it was installed back in the 80s to extend it to the plant. Right now, it stops about 1,000 feet short. So we're going to finally extend that to the plant. That's going to be common no matter what. Another thing that we've talked about, you may recall, the Klein's Island, the peak capacity now is 84. We're going to do 2 projects to get it to 120, 84 to 100, and 100 to 120. And above 120, it's time for a discussion for another day. As a sidebar, Brian, on this past Tuesday, the plant got to 81 as an example. So that was the remnants of Hurricane Ian. It was obviously long after the hurricane hit. So we got to 81 last week. So that's the whole thing. So again, if it got to 84, OC would have been activated. And then, DEP would have been made aware. So that's a high level of task 1. And then we're gonna, again, take the signatories' inputs about their hydraulic grade line. And then the deliverables are going to be a memo and cost estimating on these common components.
Why would signatories have different hydraulic grade lines?
If a signatory does not mind having their pipe pressurized, they could operate their system pressurized if they so choose. So it operates pressurized now. So in the future, if they want the grade line below the rim, they need to tell us. If not, then it'll be pressurized like it is now. So everyone no one's told me exactly what they want yet. That's coming this month. But that's the example of people's preference.
Thanks.
Okay, so task 2 is the source reduction modeling, which is when I say the term SRP, that's source reduction plan. This is a gigantic driver for DEP. They want a strong SRP program for the entire system. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna do 3 different ways on handling these SRPs. We're gonna do nothing. That's gonna be in one model run, be no SRPs, so it's the worst case. On the other side of the spectrum, we're gonna do what we're calling benchmark SRPs. And that's Arcadis taking their knowledge of the system, all the SSES work we did this past year, and not worry about municipal boundaries, just based on the data, based on a reasonable, what's most reasonable. If they had control of the system, this is what the benchmark SRP would be. So we have nothing, we get the benchmark. Tricky part is every signatory is supposed to give us their SRP. And we're meeting with, we've talked about this month after month after month. They are due to us by December. And the tricky part is we don't know how far away the individual SRPs are going to be from the benchmark. Hopefully they're close. Hopefully they're better than the benchmark. But I'll talk about the different model runs. So there'll be a combination of the benchmark SRP, and then there'll be a combination of using their SRPs. So again, DEP is going to be looking at this, and if signatories don't propose a strong SRP, they have to deal with that DEP directly. Task 3. Task 3 is where we're going to get into the actual, playing with the sizing of the piping, the changes at the plant for wet weather, upsizing any pump stations as needed, identifying any problems with the existing sewer billing meters. And again, there's a lot of input, a lot of meetings that went into this to get to this point. We're going to take input from all the signatories, all the consulting engineers on board. And again, that's all spelled out in the appendices, but this is where the actual changes are going to occur within the model under this task. And then the next task is going to be where we actually, break the changes into chunks. So what we're going to do is 2 different model runs, or 2 different rounds, I guess you should say. A total of 15 model runs is being budgeted, and we're going to do 6 up front. And then we're going to do 4 with the signatory SRPs, and then 5 put to the side for anything that may come up between now and April. All right, so what those 6 are. Again, the first one is the worst case scenario, and it's no SRP, and it's all gravity. So what happens when we assume no source reduction work will occur, and we remain as gravity? And then, what does that look like? How bad is it? What all needs upsized? Number 2, 3, and 4. We're going to take the benchmark SRP, and then we're going to do different combinations. Gravity, Little Sister Park pump station, different tie-in points for the Spring Creek pump station, all to try to see what's the best combination. And 5 and 6 are going to be what happens if we install a force main from the pretreatment plant to Klein's Island to handle wet weather flow. What will that look like in the conveyance system? So as you can imagine, there are a lot of different combinations. And we don't have time to do every single combination. We don't have the money to do every single combination. So there's a collective effort. We started this in April. We finally wrapped up 2 weeks ago about the first main 6. What do we want to achieve with the first main 6? We've agreed to this as a core group, what those first 6 are. And again, once we get those first 6 done, that's when we include the signatories SRPs with the best 4 options. And we play around with that and see what the best option is. So again, and then you get into the next phase, which is the final alternatives phase. So, we don't want to be modeling for 3 years. We don't have time to do that. So that's a high level of what the first 6 runs are going to be. They get spelled out in the proposal. I do want to point out, there's a nuance here. All dry day flow will remain treated at Klein's Island with those first 6. The nuance is under number 5 and 6, the force main, the PTP force main will be installed. And then there'll be provisions to treat wet weather from the force main at Klein's Island. So again, all dry day flow treated at Klein's Island. And if we do the force main from the pre-treatment plant, there'll be provisions to handle that flow during wet weather. So that's a little bit of nuance. And again, once we do the first 10, if we as a group want to do more, there'll be budget for 5 more runs. After we get how, up to 15 runs modeled, there will be efforts to update any pricing from 2020 and 2021 from the prior efforts, if it's still applicable. And then, of course, each model run will get its own construction estimate, energy costs, if there's pumping involved. Again, there's 2 bullet points in the middle there. Assumes overflows are eliminated under 2050 conditions during a 5-year storm. And it assumes a hydraulic grade line is achieved based on what has been told to us. And then deliverable, again, is a spreadsheet and some tables. And then, as you can also imagine, there's a lot of meetings associated with this effort. So, as things come up, there'll be internal meetings, signatory meetings, core group meetings, LCA board meetings, DEP meetings. A lot of meetings between now and April.
When you were at these meetings with the signatories, how many people are there?
Anywhere from 25 to 40.
Wow.
I'm not quite sure if they can process all this. We try to. We try to. There's a lot of one-on-one conversations that have to occur. The next phase of 537, we'll get to the PSOA by April, hopefully earlier. Then we're going to move right into the FAA, which is the final alternatives analysis. So by this time next year, or maybe even earlier, we'll know what the solution. We'll know what the top 3 solutions are. So that middle line there, it's a selection of solutions. That could be a little dicey about getting everyone on board. And if we still want to maintain our March 2025 deadline, at a minimum, the planning commissions need it by September of 24. So things are going to accelerate. They've been accelerated this whole year. They're going to accelerate even more. And the suburban wastewater number is going to look a little different, I guess. Yeah, I expect to see some of them reserves disappear a little bit. So that's the high level look. We're still on schedule. Once the numbers begin to appear officially, my intent is to not make sure it doesn't go off the rails too quickly, but the numbers have already been thrown out. It's not going to be cheap to do this. And DEP expects this, or planning modules are at stake.
Any questions for Phil?
Ultimately, the request at hand is
Special service authorization to Arcadis in the amount of 404. And then a CPA in the amount of $454,000.
Okay, that, we're looking for approval of this, contract with Arcadis. To the tune of $404,000, with an extra $50,000 thrown in by the LCA. We need a motion for capital plan authorization of this, and also including that special service authorization to hire Arcadis to do this. And just, I think I have everything there. Have a motion? Anybody for a motion? Yeah.
Sure, so moved.
I'll second that.
We'll
I was waiting for Norma to give her a chance.
Norma's got the second.
Thank you.
Okay, Norma, any discussion on this motion? If not, all in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. Any negatives? Ayes carried, motion approved. Thank you very much. Okay, next order of business. Next project update.
Yeah. So you have the report in your packet. It's on the white pieces of paper at the end of the packet. And just to give you a couple of brief highlights for your next meeting in 2 weeks. Again, we mentioned earlier with the budget, if there are questions on the budget, once you absorb the packet and, you know, thought about it, would love to have those questions and comments in advance of the meeting on the 24th, so we can actually incorporate answers into any final presentation. We have a couple from today. If there's any others, please try to get them to me in the next week or so. So at the next meeting, we will ask for approval of the budget. And we are also, along with that, hoping to have results of our suburban water rate study to share with you. Also, at the next meeting on the 24th, we'll give our regular quarterly progress report on our strategic plan. And we have plans to share with you a proposal on an asset management, a strategic asset management plan project that we want to kick off next time. And that will be the 24th as well. We have in the report also just a long-term preview of a project that's coming up in November that's shown there for a manhole rehab project. And then there's a couple of updates that are shown in the report. If there's any questions about those or any of the other projects, happy to try to answer them.
Thank you, Liesl. Next item of business is to staff comments.
I have nothing additional.
Stay with those comments.
No comments, thank you.
How about any comments from the public? Any board member comments?
Yes, I'd like to ask a question if I may.
Sure.
Did you see the article in the paper that demonized the Lehigh River, Little Lehigh? Did you respond, or is there anybody responded to that organization?
So there was an article maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, something like that, about the Penn Environment Report. I know some of the staff, Andrew Moore has looked at it in some detail, and Sue and I have looked at it. We have not reached out to that group specifically, but that group has been known to publish reports and do press conferences about issues of environmental importance. They have a certain agenda that they're trying to raise awareness about environmental issues, but there's certainly some challenges with the way they.
Yeah, they try to make it sound like it's death on the wood.
Well, my question is, from what I gather, they weren't talking about what's actually going into the waters. They were just talking about what's being produced.
Right.
It didn't see, although they seem to suggest that this is what's going into them, but it's not. Isn't it just about how much toxins are being produced in the Lehigh Valley area?
Yeah, my understanding is that they didn't do water sampling or use any sampling results. It was more a review of what's permitted or what the uses are in the region. If you have more questions, Andrew's on the call. He looked at it in more detail.
Yeah, I can comment here. So basically, all they did was really a paper analysis. and took information from the EPA's website called the toxic. Now I'm forgetting what it's called, but they have a website that makes all of the industries record certain waste that they dispose of. So a lot of these toxins that they mentioned were not necessarily making it to the waterway. It's just that they disposed of them. So it's a little bit sketchy on how it was worded because technically some of those could have been going through treatment plants and you could have some treatment, whether it be solid settling or some other type of analysis that wouldn't necessarily show up in a waterway.
Yeah, that's what I thought it was.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Dick.
Yep.
Any other board comments? You want me to terminate this meeting and then we go into executive session?
Yes, we have a executive session, with a separate link for the board members to use for that. Same one as we had earlier. So we had an earlier executive session related to matters of potential litigation and discussion with our solicitor. And then we'll have one at the close of this meeting to discuss matters of real estate
Is
acquisition.
there any anticipation that we're gonna have to reconvene this meeting after the executive session to take action?
No, not today, not for this one.
Okay, I didn't catch your name, but I want to thank you for coming in. What was your name again?
Brian Geisel,
And your position is?
project engineer, manager. At the
Project
city
engineer
plants,
what?
project engineer at the city plants.
Okay, thank you. If there's nothing more, I'd like, I'll adjourn this meeting. Thank you very much.
What time do you want to
Well,
reconvene the executive
let's see.
session?
About 2 minutes. 2 minutes. You want to